What is up, folks? My name is Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here where they look at the Week 3 main slate coming up here this weekend. We have 13 games of NFL football on the main slate. No rogue Friday Island game, no two-gamer on Monday night, just a full slate of Sunday action, and we have plenty of good options to pick from for some single-day lineups here on DraftKings and FanDuel. We have 8 games in the 1 p.m. window and 5 games in the 4 p.m. window. And unlike last week, we actually have a lot of plays in the 4 p.m. window that we're big fans of this week. First and foremost, I always like to start with my favorite play on the slate. And yeah, I am eating a little bit of the chalk this week with Jordan Mason. Jordan Mason is going to be the most popular player on both DraftKings and FanDuel at 30% plus ownership, probably significantly higher than that in smaller field stuff, as the true bell cow running back now for the Minnesota Vikings against the Cincinnati Bengals. Aaron Jones is on injured reserve with a hamstring injury, so he will miss the next 4 weeks. And Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell has said that there's nobody that he trusts more than Jordan Mason to be able to handle the workload in this backfield. He kind of has to say that because they're so banged up deep on the depth chart as well that they really don't have plenty of other options to consider. They did sign Cam Akers back to their practice squad here, rejoining the Vikings after spending preseason with the Saints, but no one really expected to have meaningful work in this backfield for Minnesota other than Jordan Mason here at home as a 3-point favorite against the Cincinnati Bengals. This year, the Bengals are dead on league average defending the rush, 5th worst pass defense defending running backs in the passing game, and the Vikings run blocking offensive line is also fairly league average, so good spot overall for Mason at home here to make his debut as the bona fide starter for the Vikings at running back. Now, other than Mason, I like to look at the running backs playing for teams that are big favorites every single week. Why? Spreads and totals in betting markets usually give us a pretty good indication of which teams are going to be playing in positive game scripts for their running backs. This week, you have 2 favorites that are favored by 7.5 points. That's going to be the Seattle Seahawks and the Green Bay Packers. And the Seahawks became much more interesting to consider for running back plays today because we got news that Zach Charbonnet is doubtful this week to play. He's no longer expected to play at all this Sunday. And that, to me, basically means we're going to see Ken Walker get the majority of the work. They do have George Olani on the roster behind Zach Charbonnet. We'll see if Seattle elevates a running back off the practice squad tomorrow before 4 p.m. That'll be our biggest indicator that Charbonnet is out. I wouldn't expect that player to get a ton of work. I would expect the Seahawks to deliver Walker with the vast majority of the touches here. He's had about 40% of team carries and like 8% of team targets. Even with Charbonnet in, they've basically been operating as a true RB1A and 1B. I kind of expect Walker to get like 3/4 of whatever Charbonnet's carries were, and maybe you'll see backup George Olani kind of mix in for the rest there. Probably see 60 to 70% of team carries for Ken Walker in this game. I'd say 10 to 20% for Olani, and then the rest between quarterbacks and trick plays that Seattle wants to run. So that, to me, gives Walker a pretty high floor here as the biggest favorite on the slate and playing the New Orleans Saints, who are league average rush defense and below average against running backs in the passing game. Shouldn't see a meaningful change in Walker's passing game volume because Charbonnet didn't really get any targets this far this season. But obviously, if Walker has more playing time, then he's more likely to see more targets. I kind of like getting him into low-risk lineups now with all of those factors at play here. Good matchup, reasonable price on both DraftKings and FanDuel, and the biggest favorite on the slate. So pretty clear opportunity to play Walker here for me at 5,800 versus some of these more expensive guys I'm about to talk about in a second. Josh Jacobs with the Green Bay Packers. They're the biggest favorite against the Cleveland Browns on the road. The biggest thing that's a knock against Jacobs this year certainly isn't his workload. He's had plenty of touches in this backfield for Green Bay, 19 and 23 carries respectively in the first 2 games of the season. But if there's one thing the Cleveland Browns do well, they're actually the number 1 rush defense in the league thus far by DVOA. Shout out to FDN Fantasy's Aaron Schatz, formerly Football Outsiders, for that metric. So that suggests to me that he could be in for a tough day here on the ground against Cleveland's defense. I would shy away from Jacobs here. We saw Cleveland did bottle up Derrick Henry a little bit last week. Now it's potentially Josh Jacobs' turn to be put in a box there by the Cleveland Browns defensive front. I think Jordan Love is going to have to get it done through the air to take care of business against Cleveland and meet market expectation here. So I'm off of Josh Jacobs for low-risk contests, but that means he's probably a good high-risk contest play with Green Bay favored. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are your next biggest favorite behind both Seattle and Green Bay. They're favored by 6.5 points here against the New York Jets, and they're going to be at home here in the 1 p.m. window. What's great about Bucky Irving is that he gives you that floor in the passing game too. He's got 4 and 6 targets respectively over the first couple of games of the season. You should see like 15 to 20 raw touches between his carries and his targets in this offense. Against the Jets defense, it's below average against both the rush and running backs in the passing game. Tampa Bay at home favored by nearly a touchdown. Pretty good spot for Irving as well. And I thought the clear number 2 play at running back on this slate before we got some of the value with Mason and with Walker. But you may actually see his ownership get a little squeezed here because I think the field is going to be more excited to play 2 guys at the top of the salary table and Christian McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson and not necessarily Bucky Irving. And while I think he's a good low-risk play, if the ownership comes in a little lower, it becomes a great high-risk play at low ownership as well here. So speaking of that other high-end asset in Bijan Robinson, the final quote-unquote big and next biggest favorite on this slate are those Atlanta Falcons. They're favored by 4.5 points on the road against the Carolina Panthers this week. Bijan is that dude, guys. We saw the workload on Monday Night Football. The Carolina Panthers are the 24th ranked rush defense this year, so that's well below average. They're pretty tough against running backs in the passing game, which has been a big role for Bijan thus far on the season with 12 total targets, 7 and 5 in the first 2 games of the season. Definitely more involved in the passing game than Tyler Algier. Algier getting a decent amount of work on the ground, though. He still has a 20 to 30% share of overall team rushes. Atlanta's just running the football a lot more than I think we expected. So Bijan's still a good bet to see 25 to 30 touches in this offense. And that's why people are trying to pay up to him here because there are plenty of value spots on the board with other running backs, but also with some really, really mispriced wide receivers, cheap tight ends, and bottom of the barrel prices for some quarterbacks this week due to some injury situations. So it's pretty easy for people to get up to Bijan and CMC in their lineups. So your big favorites, Ken Walker, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, and Bijan Robinson. My 6th and final player running back that you should be aware of, Christian McCaffrey. Not a huge favorite, but the 49ers are 3-point home favorites here against the Cardinals. Cardinals have actually been a top 10 rush defense on the short season, but they have been pretty below average against they've been very below average against running backs in the passing game, 24th in the NFL right now by DVOA, and obviously that's not good when you're coming into a matchup with Christian McCaffrey, who's one of the best pass-catching running backs in the history of the National Football League. So really good spot here for him. The touches have been absolutely incredible. Back to basically old school Christian McCaffrey here for as long as he stays healthy here for San Francisco. We've got 20 to 30 touch upside here with McCaffrey. That's still pretty good, even though his price is creeping up. And he'll probably be the 2nd most popular play on this slate behind Jordan Mason. So this is my favorite core for low risk, but I'm leaving 3 really, really good plays out, and I'm not sure how I feel about that right now with Bijan Robinson, with Bucky Irving, and even with Josh Jacobs. Jacobs is the one that I feel the best about leaving out in this group, but the other 2, I definitely want to mix them in if I'm playing multiple lineups this week. Even though the Seattle Seahawks have the best likelihood of a positive outcome here, being favored by 7.5 points, I think the only thing that might be different here that I have versus what the field will deploy this week on DraftKings is they might sacrifice Walker for Bijan here because pricing in a few of the spots I'm about to show you will allow them to do that. So just keep that in mind as I continue to build out the rest of this lineup here in this video. Talking about the quarterback situation this week. Last week, we had a ton of stud quarterbacks to consider. We had all of the big names in Mahomes and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And yeah, some of those worked out a lot better than others. Lamar Jackson was a great play. Josh Allen, not so good with the touchdown regression. It all went on the ground. We don't necessarily have as many options here this week. We got some injuries that have impacted what's available to us, and we have a lot of the good quarterbacks on primetime island single game showdown slates. So we're left with basically Jalen Hurts as the lone quote unquote superstar quarterback on this slate, and he's not exactly super expensive at $6,800. Although there's a lot of smoke out there about the NFL being interested in policing the tush push this week, so we'll see if that keeps people off of Jalen Hurts here. Remains to be seen. Jaden Daniels out this week with a knee injury. Joe Burrow going to be out for the next 3 months with a foot injury. No Mahomes, no Allen, no Lamar Jackson. What do we do here? We look to these backup quarterbacks that are going to be getting starts in lieu of these guys that would have been popular. You see a player like Jaden Daniels, who was $7,000, who has rushing upside, and was probably going to be super, super popular against the Las Vegas Raiders at home in this spot. Well, now his backup, Marcus Mariota, a longtime NFL vet with plenty of starting experience, who doesn't exactly have terrible numbers if you really scrutinize them, gets to come in at the minimum price of $4,000. If you liked playing Daniels at $7,000, yeah, you're getting access to a little bit more rushing upside, probably 8, 9, 10 carries, whereas Mariota might get like 3 or 4 scrambles, not as many designed rushes, but you're still getting access to that same Commanders offense that's favored by 3 points here at the minimum of $4,000. And I think ultimately Mariota is going to be the most popular play for low-risk contests this week because of this pricing and because he's playing on a very, very good football team here in week number 3. There is another min price option. It is Minnesota's Carson Wentz, but I think at this point, even though you have Wentz also favored by 3 points at home, that Washington and Las Vegas Raiders game is a little bit of a higher total in betting markets. So I do think you still basically end up flipping that coin with the side of Mariota because Washington has a higher implied team total. And I do think Mariota has a little bit better floor ceiling combination than Carson Wentz. Your other backups, staying in the same game with Carson Wentz, you have Jake Browning at 5,500 here on DraftKings. He'll be playing in lieu of Joe Burrow for the next few months, we think at least. We have Tyrod Taylor, or excuse me, as Baker so aptly corrected the media this week, Tyrod Taylor making the start for the Jets here. Justin Fields in concussion protocol. Taylor's 4,800. And we have Mac Jones, who's probably in line for another start for the 49ers this week at $5,000. You got Tyrod Taylor, you got Mac Jones, you got Jake Browning, all significantly higher priced than Wentz and Browning. I'd like some of these guys for tournament plays this week, but for low risk, Marcus Mariota seems to be, in my opinion, the best value play here and where I'm probably going and where a lot of the field is going to be going this week. Other 2 quarterbacks that are going to be popular for low risk. When we talk about teams that are favored by a ton of points, we had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers favored by 6.5. We've got Baker Mayfield quarterbacking those Tampa Bay Buccaneers with the second highest implied team total this week. So I think you will see people look towards him in low-risk lineups. They may even go a little further down the salary table and play Dak Prescott at a modest price here on DraftKings and FanDuel, with Dallas favored by 1 to 2 points, depending on the books you look. It's a little inconsistent here right now, Dallas on the road, but a lot of the action in betting markets is flipping this spread in favor of Dallas. It did open a slight like half point in favor of Chicago. Like our model right now still has that opening line with Chicago favored in it. But I do believe you got Dallas favored here on the road in a really, really strong spot against the Chicago Bears. And the highest total game of the slate, 50 points. Dak Prescott, a great low-risk play. Probably was my plug-and-play before this Mariota value opened. Tight end position, Trey McBride should get 7, 8+ targets in this offense every single week. And, well, it's going to be easy to get him into your lineup because you got the value of quarterback this week. But Jake Ferguson with Dallas, playing on the highest implied team total offense against the Washington Commanders, who have also been the worst pass defense in the league this year. So that's another vote for Dak and his pass catchers here. And then we have Juwan Johnson. Awesome work here with the New Orleans Saints through 2 games with Spencer Rattler, 9+ targets in each of the first 2 games. Just $3,900 still. There's your best value plays on this slate behind Trey McBride. So let's just configure a lineup that uses, probably Ferguson projects a little better than Johnson here. But if we need that $100, we can come back to that. We got $56.50 per player remaining. We haven't even taken another salary discount by playing a defense here. Let's just slot in the highest priced defense, who's probably also going to be popular in the Green Bay Packers. We still have $6,300 per player remaining here on DraftKings for our wide receivers. And when we talk about missed price plays at wide receiver, I'm focused on this range here when we scroll down a little bit. Jackson Smith-Njigba here has 9 targets and 13 targets through the first 2 games of the season. When you dive into Seattle's usage in the passing game through the first 2 weeks, JSN here has a 44% target share and 58% of team air yards. Weighted opportunity of over 1, which is unheard of and is definitely unsustainable for that reason. But the bottom line is, in this offense, he is the guy. He is the alpha at receiver, and you get him at $6,500 with Seattle favored by 7.5 points with one of the top 5 implied team totals on this slate. I think you've got to really strongly consider him for low-risk lineups this week. We also have, in a 50-point total game, the highest total game on the slate, Rome Odunze here at an extremely affordable price of $5,300 on DraftKings, $6,400 over on FanDuel. He is sporting a 28.5% target share and a 44% share of team air yards for the Bears here. Now, not necessarily getting a perception discount with the 3 touchdowns thus far, but he's Caleb Williams' #1 receiver. It's not DJ Moore anymore. It is officially Rome Odunze. You can get him at $5,300. When you look at even a player who is kind of an old face in an old place this year, Keenan Allen with the Chargers. Chargers are throwing the ball a lot more than we expected through the first couple of weeks of the season. 10 targets, 7 targets through the first couple of weeks of the season for Keenan Allen. 28% share of team targets, just a 27% share of team air yards because he's running some shallower routes, but definitely a high floor of production at an affordable price here on DraftKings. He is the number 1 weighted opportunity wide receiver for the Chargers this year. You get him at that price here on DraftKings. Where are you? I'm talking to myself looking for Jacoby Myers at $5,600 here for the Raiders. Jacoby Myers has 28% of team targets, 26% of team air yards, 21 total targets on the season, no touchdowns just yet. Starting to approach underperforming wide receiver season here for us once we get through week 3. Jacoby Myers on track for that. But strong weighted opportunity here for Myers at an affordable price. These are all wide receiver ones that I've just named in their offenses, the way that they're being used by their quarterbacks, by their offensive coordinators, and you see the prices are all over the place, here on DraftKings anyway. They're between $4,700 and $6,500, and you get discounts for these guys versus their high-end counterparts like Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase has an awesome role, but his role is 34% of team targets, 38% of team air yards, and he just got a big downgrade at quarterback with Browning over Joe Burrow here. We've got Justin Jefferson, $7,500. He's got an awesome role, 34% of team targets, 45% of team air yards. This team hasn't been throwing the ball a ton, just 13 total targets. So that's one thing that's working against him here. And we got a backup quarterback in Carson Wentz taking over this week, so maybe that presents itself as a problem. I think Puka Nacua of this expensive group is probably one of the better plays, but we're playing the Super Bowl champion Eagles defense, which has stifled their opponents thus far through the first couple weeks of the season, so that could be slightly concerning. We did see Puka have a good game in the playoffs, though, against these Eagles last year, so maybe he'll be able to overcome that. By far the most popular player at the top of the salary table here is going to be CeeDee Lamb in that 50-point total game. He'll be a low-risk play at $8,000. 11 plus targets through the first couple of weeks of the season. When we look at what Lamb has done, he's compiled a 29% target share and a 42% share of team air yards. He still has not found the end zone. He has not gotten in the box for the Cowboys here. This will be a good week for that to change. And then we're going to come back to CD when we look at our tournament lineups here. I am preferring to build in this value range. And for me, I like JSN. I like coming down to Keenan Allen here on DraftKings for the value. And I got $7,700 left. I paid up for the most expensive defense. Keep that in mind. I can play Nacua, anybody below, or if I massage defense a little bit, you can get up to any receiver you want for this final spot. So like Chase at $8,100 leaves us $3,300 for a defense. When we look at the defenses priced $3,300 or less, you got the Falcons favored by 4.5 points at home. I mean, that pretty much allows us to do whatever we want at receiver here for that final spot. But again, remember I told you, I think the field is going to have a couple of different paths here. I don't know if it's going to end up being Walker, Kenneth Chalker. I think it might end up being McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson here, in which case we can keep the same core. We can have Bijan in here over Walker. We got $6,100 for a final wide receiver. And definitely a lot of guys that I like in this range. By far the one that was my favorite was Rome Odunze. And now we have room to come back up on defense to the best play at the position, if that's the direction we want to go for a low-risk lineup this week here on DraftKings. Now, over on FanDuel, I do prefer Odunze to Keenan Allen because of the half-point PPR value. I just do think Odunze has a little bit higher floor, a little bit higher ceiling over there. See, I still have Falcons defense here. I have Walker in on this one, paid for Nacua, who I believe is the second most expensive wide receiver on this slate. But you have your same situation in play here on FanDuel where we may see the field get away from that. We may see the field put Bijan in instead. Now we have $6,200 for that final wide receiver spot. And now we're looking at Jacoby Myers, Keenan Allen, all these guys in this range. That's perfectly acceptable, I think, for a low-risk lineup as well this week on DraftKings and FanDuel. You all know what to do to leave in the comments here when you see something like that on this channel. I'm going to get in on the action here a little bit this week, all right? Okay. Defense. Should talk at least about how the model ranks these teams a little bit. I'll flip over to that for you guys. When we look at our defense rankings, we love the Vikings, and that's pretty good correlation with Jordan Mason, the most popular play on the slate, so you can certainly do that in all contest types. We only see them being just 4 to 5% on both DraftKings and FanDuel, so not the most popular play here. We like the Bears for tournaments. We think they'll generate a lot of pressure against the Cowboys this week. We got the Commanders approaching popular on DraftKings at 7%, just 4% over on FanDuel, and then we see the Falcons here ranked 4th. When we sort by ownership, and I'll start with DraftKings, we got the Packers as the most popular play. For a lot of the reasons that you probably could have deduced when I was clicking around with building a low-risk lineup here, you can just land on a 7.5-point favorite defense that has looked pretty darn good through the first couple weeks of the season very easily here with the value that we have up and down the board at different positions. So it's no surprise to me personally that we see the Packers on here. I like the Commanders defense as well as a favorite because they project for high ownership and they rank pretty highly in our model for a low-risk play. Get one more water sip in before we start talking about the high-risk plays, our favorite tournament plays on this slate, and I'll get into some more wide receivers that I think are mispriced that are also going to be lower owned this week. When we talk tournaments, it's probably a fair place to start with the highest total game on the slate. And to me, that's the Dallas Cowboys. We want to get Dak Prescott with his highest target share receiver, and we can get a popular tight end in here as well. We get a popular bringback in Rome Odunze. This is probably going to be one of your most popular 3-1s that everyone's going to land on this week, but for good reason. It's very easy to get to it. We can get cheap running backs in here. My favorite ones are going to be the ones that I'm looking at for low risk. That's going to be Walker with Seattle, and then obviously we have Jordan Mason, our favorite play on the slate, at running back. 5,200 for our final couple spots here. We're obviously going to save some money with defense. I'll go Commanders here, right? 6,300 per spot. This is I still like JSN because he's actually personally one of my highest ranked plays on the slate here. And then we got $6,100 for a final spot at flex. You can get Javonte Williams and really get in on Dallas. Go 4-1. I probably wouldn't do that in anything other than like small field contests because that's a lot of concentrated risk. But just tons of great plays here to finish off tournament lineup. Also got access to George Pickens. So just a ton of different ways to stack Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys this week. One of my favorite stacks. I know it's got one of the lower totals on this slate, but it also has some of the best players in the National Football League that we can stack. And it's this Cincinnati and Minnesota game. We get Jamar Chase in here with Browning. We got Jordan Mason. That's a pretty solid 2-1 stack that's really cheap. How about this, though? If you come off Browning and you play the other side, and you play Carson Wentz, you play Justin Jefferson here, I mean, you got plenty of salary here to finish this off with a lot of the value plays that I've already talked about here. I do think both sides of this Cincinnati and Minnesota game are interesting from a missed price asset standpoint. You got an underpriced RB1, underpriced starting QB, both on Minnesota, and an underpriced quarterback for Cincinnati. Because if you value the role on these offenses that these players are stepping into this week, they're probably not going to be as expensive as their starting counterparts would be. I know that's like not a tremendously shocking thing to say, but they're definitely more expensive than the prices that they have, particularly on the Minnesota side with Wentz and Mason. So I think that gives us the opportunity to take advantage of this here. Personally, I think I'm going to go with the Dallas-Chicago stack in my single entry high-risk lineups this week, but I definitely like this one a lot. I have a couple of other stacks that I really like this week available in the daily plug over on OccupyFantasy.com, free for all subscribers to the website there. So check out the link in the description of the video below if you subscribe to our website, if you want to check that out. If not, please consider subscribing. We would really appreciate that. To wrap things up here, I want to talk about, for the final time, wide receivers that are going to be 5% or less by our projections this week that have probably more upside than those ownership projections show. The first one is in that super high total game. As of right, when we go to the Occupy model, and this is kind of the double-edged sword of doing this for you guys, is by putting this out there, I think this will raise ownership on some of these guys a little bit, especially if some of you guys rush in and play some of these guys at lower ownership. But look at who's up here. We got Michael Pittman, the wide receiver 1 for the Colts, projected for 8 to 9 targets. He is projected to be 2% owned on DraftKings and FanDuel. We got George Pickens with the Dallas Cowboys, the wide receiver 2, projected to be 3 to 5% on DraftKings and FanDuel at his modest pricing, projected for 9 to 10 targets. We got Troy Franklin, got in the end zone last week, also projected to be under 5% with Denver. We've got Terry McLaurin, a cheap wide receiver that you could pair with Marcus Mariota if you wanted to go with a Washington stack in high risk this week. He's going to be 5% or less, according to us. And then JSN's teammate Cooper Kupp, looking to be 2% on DraftKings, 1% on FanDuel, respectively. All of these guys I just talked about, we project for 7+ targets, and there's plenty more of these players that have that game-winning 25+ fantasy point upside if they catch a couple long balls, if they get a touchdown or two. They have the work available to them in their offenses to make that ceiling accessible, and some of these guys, we've seen them hit that ceiling before. So really like what's available to us at low ownership here on this slate. For me, my favorite play in this lower owned group actually is one I have to cheat a little bit to throw into the video. We have to go up to about 10% to find him in our projections, and it's going to be New Orleans' Chris Olave. Olave leads the Saints in weighted opportunity, and if we look at just both sides of that game in the 4 o'clock window here, we got JSN, highest weighted opportunity in the entire National Football League right now at $6,500 on DraftKings, and we have Chris Olave at $5,200 here on DraftKings. This is a pretty good skinny stack, one player from both of the teams playing head-to-head that I'd be interested in getting in some of my lineups this week because of how affordable it is, but there's another reason for this. I know we don't have a full, true, valid sample. We like 3 weeks worth of data, but looking at the work for Olave through the first 2 weeks of the season, you can see double-digit targets in both games, 12 and 10 targets respectively. Chris Olave has had an expected fantasy points of 46 PPR points through these first 2 weeks of the season, and he has just 23.8. So he is officially an underperforming wide receiver, which we like to call them here, through the first 2 weeks of the season, and I think that makes him extremely attractive. Also attractive over on FanDuel. He's just 6,100 over on FanDuel. Pairs pretty nicely with JSN. JSN a lot more expensive over on FanDuel, though, where he's $8,000. But still, this thesis is still there for me. I like Seattle and New Orleans skinny stacks, particularly with these two players, Jackson Smith-Njigba and Chris Olave, for high-risk contests. And if you're following the Discord last week, I gave you a couple of low-owned plays that I liked. They both ended up scoring touchdowns at receiver. These would be my 2 for this week, JSN and Chris Olave. Folks, that is going to do it for me this week. I really appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with me on the channel for a few minutes this week. As always, good luck this weekend in your NFL DFS contests. We'll be back next week to talk to you about week 4.